When Beethoven dipped his quill in ink to write down the first notes of his Fifth Symphony, what did he hear? This? Or this? Or this? Or this? Who among you would like to know what Beethoven really had in mind at the time? Leave your answer in the comment box below. And the question is not without consequence, because what would you really do if the most famous theme in the world would have sounded different than you're used to? Would you change your vision of the piece? Would you ask musicians of today to play it differently? But apart from that, of all the versions of the Fifth Symphony that we just heard, which of these symphonies Beethoven actually wrote and which ones not? The superfast, today often labeled as supposedly historically correct, where the theme sounds like a barrage of energy, almost aggressive, or a version where the theme sounds like a dramatic, almost solemn announcement of something that won't be pleasant to hear. Does it matter, you say? Isn't every musician today entitled to make a composition from the past sound the way he or she thinks it best? Yes, absolutely. But then I come back to my earlier question. Would you like to know? Would you like to know how Beethoven would conduct his symphony if he were sent back to Earth by heavenly forces tomorrow? This video is just about that. Once we know what Beethoven wanted, each of us can do what he likes best with his music. But can we still know how this piece sounded in his head? And the answer to that is definitely no, absolutely not. A performance of a piece, be it imaginary or in practice, is subject to so many decisions by the performer, composer or not, that it will be impossible to find out exactly how he heard his own symphony. However, there is one parameter of the performance that we can reconstruct, and that is the tempo he saw as ideal. Today, we do know Beethoven's ideal tempo for this symphony. Yes, you guessed it right. He left metronome marks. No discussion necessary, since a metronome mark is unambiguously a simple frequency per minute. It is as simple for us as it was for Beethoven. And make no mistake, these 19th century composers didn't take it lightly. Their so-called MMs were never a target or an area around a certain tempo. They gave metronome marks to indicate the precise tempo they wanted for their music. And the great thing is, a metronome is like a pendulum. The cool thing about that is that we have only two legitimate ways to use it. Either we count every stroke or tick as one, representing the note value in the metronome mark as we do today, or we count, as is still the case in physics today, every two strokes as one. There are no other options. And so, we can in fact already make a first large selection from the existing recordings, because only a handful are actually at the 108 Beethoven gave in a single tick or single beat version. Gardner is one of them. And there is only one recording available that is also at 108, but at the other side of the spectrum, ours. So which version is the most authentic? With such a huge difference in pace, it should be possible to at least determine a clear direction, right? Well, we could look at the notation to solve this, but that's for another time. In this video, I want to take you to the middle of the 19th century, a time when everything was in full expansion, technical possibilities exploded, sometimes even literally, and musicians could not escape this. Everything was, not surprisingly, dominated by virtuosity. The spotlight was no longer on beauty in general, but on the individual. A new audience especially clapped for spectacle, the impressive. But this new musical trend did not only have supporters. There were critical voices not opposed to virtuosity in itself, but against demonstrating it with music from the past. For example, Beethoven. Without doubt, the most illuminating commentary on this was written in 1857 by Ludwig Bischoff, to be read in the Rheinische Musikzeitung. Bischoff was born in 1794 and thus a perfect contemporary of Karl Czerny and Ignaz Moscheles, both close friends of Beethoven. He must have been considered hopelessly conservative in 1857 because he's pursuing something that was no longer obvious, namely to ignore the wishes of the individual, the musician, in order to bring out the authentic thought of the composer. And Bischoff, already at an advanced age in 1857, still remembered how things used to be. Read along.
Es bewegt uns außerdem dazu das Bewusstsein.
It also makes me realize that I am closer to the tradition of performing Beethoven's symphonies at the beginning of our century than the present generation, and that now, at a time when this tradition is about to disappear, it is necessary that those who still know about it share their experience and conviction, especially since in recent times the arrogance of the so-called individual conception of the classical masterpieces of music has led to very strange interpretations of them.
Individuellen Auffassung der klassischen Meisterwerke der Tonkunst gar wunderliche Ausführungen derselben hervor.
Bischoff refers to the performance practice of the past from Beethoven's time, and that is important to keep in mind. Musicologists today write a lot about a culture of slowing down, romanticizing music that would have developed in the course of the 19th century. And quotations like this then are a little bit taken out of context. Yes, Bischoff argues for slower performances, but not, and here's the important nuance, based on his own taste, but based on what the composer originally had in mind. In other words, tempi in the 19th century were not getting slower, but faster and faster, completely in line with the evolution of society. To explain his thesis, Bischoff starts with How Could It Be Otherwise, the famous Fifth Symphony.
Wir beginnen mit der 5. Sinfonie in C-Moll.
We begin with the Fifth Symphony in C minor. Here, as a rule, we hear the capital error right from the first line, which unfortunately has almost become a dominant one, the exaggeration of the tempo. It is incomprehensible to us that the tempo is so often missed in this movement, since its entire content is so clearly expressed as one that tolerates nothing less than excessive speed.
Als übermassige Schnelligkeit.
This quote already gives us a bit of a direction. Let us not forget, we are looking for the interpretation that comes closest to Beethoven only in terms of tempo choice, and his metronome is our guide. We have two options. This one or this one. Somewhere we can already suspect that it may not go in the direction of the superfast version. Why? Because if Gardner's interpretation was the standard for Bischoff, the version he would refer to as authentic, how much faster must orchestra have been playing in 1857? Something like this? not very likely. But Bischoff goes more in detail in his explanation. And in this respect, this source is truly unique and the reason why I'm sharing this with you. I let Bischoff do the talking. He focuses on the famous opening motif, precisely because of the two fast tempos.
Vor allem wird der Charakter
Above
des
all, the
allbekannten
character of the well-known
Hauptmotivs
main
dadurch
motive
beeinträchtigt
is
und
thereby
verfälscht.
impaired and falsified.
Diese drei Achtel
These
müssen
3/8
dermaßen
notes must
energisch
appear so
auftreten, dass in
energetically
dem dritten
that the third
dieselbe
has the
Kraft
same
ist
power
wie im
as the
ersten
first and
und
second,
zweiten,
which is only
was nur dann
possible if
möglich
the right
ist,
tempo is
wenn durch
taken,
ein
giving the
richtiges
string
Tempo
section
der
enough time to imperceptibly break the G from the E flat.
zwischen G und S unmerklich abzusetzen.
So, not only should the 3/8 notes have an equal energy or emphasis, the tempo should also allow an articulation between the G and the E flat. Let's listen in which of the two versions this is the case. With all due respect for Gardner's version, but there can be no question here of applying what Bischoff writes. But he continues.
Bei dem Tempo aber,
But
welches
at the tempo
heutzutage
that is
wesentlich
usually
genug
taken nowadays, and in which Mendelssohn was already lacking, these 3/8 become a huddle throughout the whole movement, which, moreover, scurrying over the last one, brings something like triplets into the figure, which entirely blur the character of the motive completely.
vollends verwischt.
We will talk about Mendelssohn another time. We now focus on Bischoff's remark that the two fast tempos of 1857 turn 8 notes, the 3/8 notes of the main motive, into triplets. Doesn't that sound familiar to you? Both fragments again. It's up to you to point out which version this comment refers to. And of course, this is only a single source, and even though Bischoff, to my knowledge, never heard Beethoven himself, the minimum we can say is that this source refers very strongly to the whole beat reading of Beethoven's metronome marks. And I know that many of you will now refer to the Allegro con brio that Beethoven prescribed for this movement, and we'll cover that later in detail. Yet also this, Bischoff is not the only one who made these kinds of comments. We are almost done with the manuscript of a 700-page book in which you will read many more of these descriptions and the context around them. All things considered, let us return to the question at the beginning. What if Beethoven's famous theme, or by extension his most famous symphony, originally sounded very different from what we are used to today? In fact, as we insist today that it must have been the case. Do you open yourself up to this new version, this new music as it were, or not? That is and remains your legitimate choice, but one that you make in the knowledge that your version of the Fifth Symphony may be one that Beethoven never composed.